أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad ajil farajahum. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are now at lesson 17 in the book. This is the second lesson concerning monotheism or Tawheed specifically. So in the previous lesson, as we said, the author is directly refuting or addressing issues related to polytheism. Where did it come from? What deviations or mistakes would have happened throughout history? And then high-level discussion about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at an essential level, at the level of His essence, existence. In this lesson, what the author is going to do is to present 5 different meanings to what may be meant when we say Tawheed, when we say monotheism. And all of them are valid. So basically, he's presenting different ways of understanding the Tawheed. And he starts, the lesson starts with an introduction that basically says that depending on which field you're looking at, those meanings are going to change. And sometimes these are presented as different categories, and sometimes they're presented as being different levels or layers or ranks of Tawheed. So the general outline of the lesson is very quick introduction, and then he goes on into the 5 different meanings to Tawheed that he's going to be presenting. So the first one is negation of plurality. So plurality as in existence, external existence. Is there only one external existence or more? Second meaning of Tawheed is internally. Is it simple? Is the divine being simple or complex, compounded, composed of different parts? The third is the negation of attributes, and we'll see what that means, but this is the third meaning of Tawheed. The fourth is at the level of the divine action. Ahsantum. At the level of divine action. So when we say Tawheed al-Fi'li, what do we mean? That there's unity or there's oneness in the divine act. And then actually the last one, the independent effectuality, and we'll explain what that means, that the effects, the causality, the effects of causes in the world, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, the effects all come back to one cause, one ultimate cause. And then the author goes into 2 high-level conclusions from this entire topic and a couple of remarks on the very well-known topic of intercession and whether or not it is compatible with Tawheed or not. And then we'll add a few remarks later on. So, generally speaking, in Arabic, we're always talking about Tawheed. In English, we can translate it as oneness or monotheism. In this lesson, we're going with oneness to go with the more literal way of using the term. And the author tells us that depending on whether you're looking at the term Tawheed in philosophy or akhlaq, morality, or mysticism, irfan, or kalam, you're going to find different meanings to that term. And in fact, I would add to this that even within those disciplines, depending on which school of thought you follow, you may find different interpretations and meanings, or how deep you want to go into your studies, you may have different nuances to the terms that we find. So that's kind of a general introduction. Obviously for us, we are going to be looking at it from one specific point of view, and each one of those disciplines is looking at it from a specific point of view. There's no way for us to cover a lot of them, so we're covering the ones we're covering in this lesson, which is barely an introduction, and I'll mention a couple of points about this at the end. So one way to look at this is to say these are different categories. In other words, we're looking at it from different angles. Another way to look at it is to say you rank them, you order them, and you say some of them are more of a, I hate to use it this way, but more superficial, more at the surface way of understanding things, and these get deeper and deeper into your understanding of what Tawheed means as you add layer upon layer. So they go from easier, simpler, more superficial to deeper and more real, allowing you to understand in more complex terms Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His oneness. The first type or the first meaning of Tawheed that he refers to is the negation of plurality. Plurality in the sense of, and we have it at the end, external to essence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's being one. We're now not looking at Allah and inside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so to speak. We're looking outside of Allah. So if we look at the external reality, are we talking about more than one God or only one God? One being or more than one being? That's what we mean by the plurality, is at the external level. External world, external to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a negation of plurality. So there is none but one. That's what we mean when we say Tawheed. So to put it very simply, there is only one God. There is not more than one God. Okay, that's a very simple way to put it. And so we have it in Arabic, Tawheed al-Dhati. How many essences, how many gods, divinities, entities are there? That. How many dhawat are there? There's only one. That's Tawheed al-Dhat or Tawheed Dhati. So that's why we said we're going from the more simple to the more complex. One way to look at it is to say we are basically starting by refuting where we left off last week, which is open polytheism. When someone believes in more than one entity having divinity, having autonomous, godlike attributes, this is going in 100%, 180 degree opposition to that belief. Okay, so this negates, contradicts, refutes open polytheism, open belief in more than one God. Meaning two. Second meaning to Tawheed, negation of composition. Now we're going to look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala internally. So this is going to open the door to the third one, which is the negation of attributes. Okay. This brings us back to something we've discussed before when we talked about the cause and the nature of that ultimate cause, the necessary cause to the proof of the necessary cause to the world. We talked about all of this. We're just repeating a little bit and going a step further to what we said. That cause needs to be simple. The moment it is no longer simple, it is compounded, it is made of parts, it can no longer be the ultimate cause because it's going to rely on those parts to be what it is, and that reliance means it cannot be a necessary being. So if you guys remember that, here we start by saying we're talking about the essence. Now we're looking internally, inside that entity, and inside that entity, by opposition to everything and anything else that exists, this entity is absolutely simple. There's no compounding to it. There are no parts to it. It's just one thing. And that one thing is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Philosophically, some may say that that is pure being, but I'm not going to go there now. First point is, and we had talked about this, so it's a matter of reminder. We said it's not only that when we look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or that being, in theory, it's not that that being does not have parts, cannot be made up of parts, but we cannot imagine that being having parts. That's what we mean actual, so as it is today, as it really is, and in any imaginary world that we can come up with, we still cannot conceive of that entity having parts. And we had given examples to this. The moment you can go there, it means there's a contingent part. There's something that you can change. There's something that becomes a possible and not a necessary part to that entity. Why do we, and this is the second one, so as we saw in the first meaning we said negation of plurality. In the second meaning we said negation of composition. So Tawheed as a negation. So here the author takes a moment to say, why do we keep going back to negation? We're going basically back to a topic we talked about when we talked about the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We said we can present them as negative and positive attributes. That was one way to classify them. So here we're presenting them as negative attributes. And he says the reason we do this is because we are not that familiar. Our world is not made up of such simple entities. We don't find this purity of being in anything. So it's easier for us to go from the things we do know, which are compound, which are made up of parts, which are plural, and from there go backwards and say it cannot be that. So that's the reason why we're presenting things in a negative way. So it's more familiar than talking about, let's say, oneness, pure, real oneness. It's very abstract, very difficult to understand. Same thing with simplicity. And again, as we said, this is now looking at internal or essence. Before we continue here, I'm adding very quickly a reference, and this would require lectures on its own. Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Tawheed. A lot of the single words in this surah, in this chapter, are basically alluding to these two attributes or two ways of understanding Tawheed that we just presented. Negation of plurality, external Tawheed, and the negation of the composition, which is an internal form of Tawheed. And so, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. One way to understand, and I put it here, He is, say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Say He is Allah, the one and only. The one and only can also be understood as absolutely simple. So depending on which interpretation, which commentary you follow, which interpretation you take, Ahad can be a reference to the internal composition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being none, being absolutely simple. So Ahad, Ahadiyya, meaning He's not made up of parts, or it can mean Ahad in the sense that there's only one God. So that's the external monotheism, external Tawheed. Allahu Samad, As-Samad here is another very complicated notion, and there are no equivalents to these terms in English. But Samad can mean an entity that is absolutely stable or fixed. So that's already in opposition to anything we know. It could also mean something that is absolutely sovereign or masterful. So that's a second, and we can relate it to things that we've covered already. There's another one, that one would require, I think, a more lengthy discussion, and we're not going to go into it now, but al-ajwaf or bela jawf. Okay, so jawf basically is the inside. So this could mean that there is no inside because something is absolutely full, means that there is no room for anything else. That's one way. The other one is a reference to the immensity. Okay, so something basically without bottom, right? You would say this is a bottomless pit, for instance. That ajwaf would mean in that, it would be in that sense. Okay, so if we want to understand a term like samad, it goes in that vein, in those veins. And again, those are references to internally Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being absolute in the sense of, especially if we go with the second interpretations, we're talking about there is no room for anything. It is one simple entity and there is no room for anything else. It's absolute fullness. Yeah.
Some translations of Samad is all depend on Him. So would you say that's an accurate?
So that would be the second meaning. Yeah. So the absolutely masterful or the absolutely sovereign on the other side. So basically something that gives absolutely, so everything else depends on it absolutely. So Fakhr al-Razi gives 10, and a lot of our scholars 8 or 10 interpretations, they go back. But the reality is, if you know how to abstract them from each other, it comes down to about 2, maybe 3 different definitions, and the others are instances of it or examples of it. So the ones I'm mentioning are the highest level ones. So in theory, if you understand an entity being absolutely masterful, absolutely autonomous, and necessary for the existence, for the maintenance of anything else, then of course everything else in return is going to be entirely, absolutely dependent, relying on it. Okay, so at the end, I'm not going to spend more time on Surah Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad. That would require a lengthy discussion. He neither begat nor was he begotten, nor can there be an equal to him. Each one of these goes back to the 2 meanings of Tawheed that we gave and the next ones that we're going to be talking about. Negation of additional attributes. So I think we spent enough time talking about attributes that we know, generally speaking, we do believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has attributes. And we gave different categories, different ways of understanding them, and what we mean by them, and. So what do we mean when we say Tawheed means negating, denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala attributes? That's why I added additional attributes. Additional to what? Additional to the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a big topic in Islamic philosophy, especially if you go back in history, but it's still there today, about the attributes of essence. So if you remember, we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has attributes that we call attributes of essence and attributes of action. And attributes of action are the ones where there's a relationship, the relational attributes between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so there must be something on the other side, on a receiving end. These are attributes of action. And there are attributes of essence, whether there is anything else or not in existence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may be qualified with those attributes. For instance, al-hayat, life. For instance, ilm, qudrah, and those are the ones we talked about. This became a very big topic in Islamic history. So the issue is, I want to follow the same pattern. Let me flip it here, not presented in the same way that it's presented. The issue is that when scholars came to this topic, they're thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They see what the Quran says, they see what the hadith say. They know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala we are supposed to be able to attribute these qualities to Him or qualify Him with those attributes. Al-ilm, al-qudra, al-hayat. When the Asha'ira came to this, they said it doesn't make sense. We cannot say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equals knowledge. It doesn't work. Okay, so what are we left with? We have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we know that He has knowledge. Except that the knowledge of Allah has to be worthy of Him. The power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to be worthy of Him. So if we say that these things are not qadim, they're not as ancient as He is, then we have a problem. They're not worthy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're lacking, they're limited. The power of Allah is going to be limited. The life of Allah, the knowledge of Allah is going to be limited. Therefore, we can't say that they're the same. We have to say that they're different. So the attribute is different from the essence. And we're going to say that the essence and the attributes are both qadim. They're both ancient, as in they're both uncreated. And so they ended up with a theory called al-Qudama al-Thamaniyah, or the ancient eight. The eight being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being one, and the 7 attributes of essence being the other 7 ancients. So the qadim, the things that are uncreated, that are eternal, are 8, according to the theory of Asha'ira. So this is clearly, if this is not polytheism, I don't know what is. They are openly saying that there are 8 entities that are eternal, uncreated. Okay, so that's where the issue was. The Mu'tazila, the issue with the Mu'tazila is, and I wasn't planning to talk too much about it, but I added a line at the end. Yeah.
Why did they separate it from Allah? I didn't get that.
This would require a very lengthy discussion, but basically they're just looking at me. When you look at me, you see, what do you say? Let's say someone, for instance, you want to say they have courage, they have knowledge. So if I say Hussein has knowledge, are you and the knowledge one thing? They're not one thing. There is you and there is knowledge. It may be and it may not be. So the same thing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not equal to ilm. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not equal to life. There's a notion, there's something called life, and there's something called Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a quality, an attribute that we can associate with Allah, but they're not the same thing. They can't be. Because nothing is just a quality. The quality is the quality, and the thing, the entity is the entity. There's a substance and the Jawhar. They went into that, they fell into the trap, the easiest trap that anyone should have avoided. And I don't know if you guys remember when we talked about how to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the attributes, and we said our Imams teach us to avoid 2 things, to falling in 2 extremes. On one side, they want us to avoid ta'til. So basically, you end up with intellectual paralysis. You're unable to understand. You say, I know it's there, I will use the word, but don't ask me what it means. Okay? The Imams want us to understand what they mean, otherwise they're empty words, and to avoid tashbih. So لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَلَهُ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. You keep that in mind. What you understand is valid, but then you have to abstract it from all of its limitations that you find in the rest of creatures, and what you find in the pure form can then be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Mu'tazila tried to avoid the mistake of the Ash'ari, so they fell into the other trap. So they said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are going to say that He has knowledge, that He is knowledgeable without knowledge, that He is alive without life, that He is powerful but without power. So we cannot add, the whole point is adding, because they said they're falling into shirk. We cannot add anything to Allah. So this is just the nature of Allah. The reality is, it's the replacement theory in Niyabah. The Ash'ari fell into one problem, which is they added, and the Mu'tazila fell into another problem, which is the attributes basically mean nothing. Let's ignore them and rely only on the existence of Allah, the essence itself, and whatever you need to, you replace the essence with that attribute. So you say the attribute, al-ilm, you don't need to talk about ilm itself. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's it. So at some point we talked about this. We said to us, externally there's only one entity, and we're looking at it from different angles. So what's the difference? They're saying the same thing. There's one entity, and it's only for us as a matter of convention. The difference is we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really has ilm. The part that they're not getting, and inshallah we are, and it's not because we're geniuses, it's because our imams taught us. They taught us what it means to say as-sifa aynu dhat. We didn't even come up with that. This comes directly from the imams. So basically our imams, and this is a line that I skipped, so now we go back. So what's the solution? And this is one of the interpretations of al-amr bayn al-amrayn, and there are many. This is what we find all over theology in general, al-amr bayn al-amrayn, to show how one of them relied entirely on a superficial understanding of literature, al-Ash'ari, and they went one way mistakenly, and al-Mu'tazila relied only heavily on intellect and reason and tried to put the scripture as a secondary thing, and they fell into another problem. And the imams bring us back and show us how they're actually compatible and saying the same thing if you know how to do it. What they do not understand, the problem that they had, is they keep going back to the only familiar examples they have in this world. Of course there's no entity like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how is it in Allah? Is it attribute and essence? And the imams tell us that the attribute and the essence are one thing. For the attributes of essence, we're not talking about the attributes of action. So attributes like life, like knowledge, like power are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's dhat, are His essence. So we have to take it one step further. So if I say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has knowledge, yes, He has knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowledge. All of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowledge. All of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is life. And the other way around. All of life is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of knowledge is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All power is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One step further, which means Allah's life is equal to Allah's power, and His power is equal to His knowledge. You cannot say that about any other entity, and the imams tell us, and this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is nothing like unto Him. Okay, so this is what we mean when we say as-sifa aynu dhat. As-sifa is equal to, is the same as the essence, is the essence itself. If you don't put these two together, you're going to fall most likely into what the Ash'ari fell into, which is, I'm going to separate them. And this becomes an important topic for us when we read the riwayat, because we have a lot of references to negating attributes. And we say that this is kufr, this is a problem, do not fall into negating attributes. The riwayat are not talking about any attributes and just saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alim, qadir. We say that, the Quran says that. How is that kufr? The imams, without going in explicit detail, they're basically referring to the belief of the Ash'ari. So negating the attributes to Allah is negating that Allah's essence has additional attributes, and together these, all of them form the divine entity, which is split into the 8 al-Qudama al-Thamani. The quick argument that the author presents for this. He says, let's go through, and there are a lot of them, but this is the one that he presents in the book. He says there can only be two scenarios. Let's look at what the Ash'ara are saying. They're saying that there are these attributes and they are additional to the essence. So it can only be one of two scenarios. One scenario is to say that the attributes are internal to the essence, and the other is to say they are external to the essence. So if the attributes that are qudama, that are eternal, uncreated, are part of the essence, then we just created a compound, a non-simple entity, which has parts which cannot be the necessary being. So this is a non-simple entity. If we go into the entity having external entities with it, then we just fell into what no Muslim would ever accept, which is open polytheism. Now you just said that there are basically 8 gods. And here's the question. Are you saying that those entities are necessary or contingent? Are you saying that those necessary entities must exist, or they came to exist in some way, shape, or form? Let's take time out of the equation. Let's say they were created in order. Okay, they're qadim, uncreated in time, qadim, but still relying on God's existence. Because if we say they're not, this is open polytheism. No one is going to accept that. So let's say that they are. Okay, these entities are relying on God for their existence. So ultimately, there's only one necessary being, that is God. And the 7 attributes are relying on God's existence. Okay. Let's agree with you. What do we end up with? What we end up with is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having no life, having no knowledge, having no power, take any of them you want as an example, and creating life, and creating knowledge, and creating power. How does an ultimate cause that does not have a thing created? That's layer 1, problem. Problem 2. And they say, and then that's how we say that Allah has it. So does Allah have knowledge? Well, it depends. After He created knowledge, He can be said to have knowledge. Okay. So does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it becomes circular. Does Allah have life? Does Allah have power? Allah has no power. He creates power, and then we can say that He is powerful. That's circular. That's circular logic. Either He has it, and then He can create it, He can give it, and He created it, or He doesn't have it, then how does He create it? Where is it coming from if He doesn't have it? And once it's there, if He relies on it to have it, then it's not a necessary being with that quality. That quality is coming from the outside. And the last point he mentions in passing, he says, and this is blasphemy. How can you say of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is qualified with attributes that are not existent in Him, that exist in His creatures, and then you attribute them back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How does that work? So these are some of the quick issues with the theory of the Ash'ara. So here I'm just mentioning quickly the first sermon of Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. It's very well known, and what's more, without too much commentary. So the foremost in religion is the acknowledgement of Him. أول الدين معرفته. The perfection of acknowledging Him is to testify Him, to basically believe that He exists. The perfection of testifying Him is to believe in His oneness. Okay. The perfection of believing in His oneness is to believe in that oneness in a sincere manner, in a pure manner. Al-ikhlas ilayh in Arabic. Okay, so here it's translated as to be sincere towards Him. So to have a pure belief. What does that mean? The Imam is explaining every term. What does it mean to have this pure belief? And the perfection of being sincere is to deny Him attributes. So this is an example of where we say, we have a lot of narrations that say, do not use, do not add, do not give Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala attributes. In what sense? in the sense that we just explained, which is what the Ash'ari did. They added attributes to the divine essence. Whereas the theory, the truth that Ahlul Bayt were teaching is that the attributes are not additional to the essence. They are the essence. These are not two different things. And the perfection of being sincere is to deny him attributes, because every attribute, so I put that little star because I mean additional attribute that is additional to the essence. Why? Why is it insincere to have this kind of addition to the essence? Because every attribute, every sifa that you're thinking about is itself proof that it's different from that to which it is attributed to. If I say you have courage, courage is one thing and you are something else. You have courage. If that's what you're doing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you're saying there's Allah and there's life, and life is added to the divine essence, there's Allah and there's power, and power is added to the divine essence, you're basically saying there's more than one entity. And this is exactly what they did. Al-Ash'ari did not exist at that time, and the Imam was telling them what they're going to do. Is itself proof that it is different from that to which it is attributed, and everything to which something is attributed or attributable, the moment you can add something to the essence of something, you basically say that these are two things. And then the Imam takes it one level lower. Thus, whoever attaches attributes to Allah recognizes a like. So you basically say there can be something like Allah, because you just attributed something to him like you would to anything else. And whoever recognizes his like regards him as being two. And whoever recognizes him as being two, you now say that he is made up of parts. And if you say he's made up of parts, you're gonna jahilah, waman jahilahu, you mistake him. You're no longer talking about the same God that you're supposed to. Waman jahilahu, you're gonna point to him. Ashara ilay, waman ashara ilay faqad haddah. Now you've limited him. Waman haddahu faqad addah. You're gonna say that he is countable. Okay, now what's left of Tawheed? And this is maybe very quickly we say to understand this properly, this requires a good lengthy discussion, this sermon or discussions. So people who say, Islam has no place for philosophy or philosophical thinking, I need to understand this sermon when they say you can just understand it. Anyways, I'm not going to spend more time on this. The fourth meaning of Tawheed, unity of divine action. So here the author actually split this. He could have had it into one meaning. He made it into two meanings. So one of them is he called unity of divine action. The other one is independent effectuality. And we'll explain what that means. So in meaning 4, he's saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he acts, his act is complete. There is nothing outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his action that is required to complete the action. And though he goes into, first of all, reminding us what we meant when we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate cause. His causality is full, is absolute, is complete. Secondly, the meaning, in our terminology, in the scriptural terminology, the word that goes with this part of the divine action is Al-Qayyum. And we talked very quickly about this at some point when we talked about the attributes of essence and action. Now we're in the action. We talked about Tawheed and different types of Tawheed and essence. Now we're in action. We said the verse, Ayat al-Kursi, begins with Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum. And this is part of the greatness of this verse, is that if you roll back the attributes of essence into one attribute, it would be al-hayy, according to one theory, and the attributes of action would be rolled up back into one attribute, which is al-qayyum. So al-qayyum is the one that maintains, but maintains absolutely. You maintain not only in our maybe superficial way, we would say you maintain through rizq, through sustenance. No, it's you maintain the existence, you maintain the initial existence and the perpetuity, the continued existence of everything that exists. And we'll give a lot of examples to this. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qayyum, He is an absolute maintainer, and He is a ultimate cause, this means that everything else relies on Him absolutely, from every angle. So what is left? Those other entities that exist, what are they? So without spending too much time on this, I'm summarizing it in one bullet here, and inshallah maybe one day we can talk about this more. They say that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qayyum, is maintainer absolutely, and everything else is in that relationship with Allah, what's left is nothing except the relationship of neediness. Sorry? Faqr dhati, exactly. Absolute neediness. It's not that there is an entity and that entity has a need. The entity doesn't even exist. It's the relationship of need itself is what you are, and what every creature is. So it's absolute reliance. If you keep that in mind, then you cannot come back and say, and therefore God's action requires anything from the outside. Because this is, of course, in reaction to different theories, whether Islamic or non-Islamic theories. That say, for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will perform an action or will allow another entity to perform an action, and then that entity autonomously can do something on its own. That cannot even be the case. That entity's existence and every power it has, every moment, every instant that exists, every faculty that it has that continues to exist is maintained every instant by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what we mean from at this level when we say unity of divine action. So the unity as in it does not require anything from the outside to be an absolute or complete act. The fifth meaning, independent effectuality. Effectuality in the sense that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes, there's an effect. When there's a cause, there's an effect to that cause. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has absolutely independent effectuality. So what do we mean? Here, maybe if I don't know if I wrote it or not, the mystics will maybe use the independent effectuality, and here sometimes, depending on which books you're reading and which schools of thought those authors are falling into, you might have some confusion between tawheed fi'li, tawheed af'ali, tawheed fa'ili. So be careful with those. You have them in English, so you should be able to understand them, refer back to those. So the mystics refer to this type, this independence of effectuality, they refer to it as tawheed af'ali. And we've talked a little bit about this before. Keep in mind the entire discussion that we presented about causes being vertical and horizontal. So we said, let's say, for instance, here's some examples. A child who goes to pay at the cash register with the money of their parents. Do we say that it is the child who's paying, or is it the parent who's paying? Whose money is it? The parents. So which one is it? So you could say ultimately, and this is why I use these terms here, we can talk about proximate and distal cause. In philosophy they say a proximate cause, even in law. When an accident happens and there's a domino effect, a proximate cause is the one that is close enough. It may not be the ultimate reason why this happened, but it's close enough that you can say this is the reason why it happened. Well, same thing in philosophy. The causality here, we can say there's a proximate cause. Sometimes there's a distal cause, so this is a far away cause, but it's still a cause. And usually they stop there. In law, they would just say distal cause. I'm going to go a little bit further and say, and there's an ultimate cause, because there might be causes in between, intermediary causality. I shouldn't even stop at the parents. The parents probably got paid from someone else, and that money came from somewhere else. And there is no real ultimate cause unless you go back in the chain of being to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, but for the example, when we say the child is paying with their parents' money, ultimately, really, it's the parents paying, but they allow the child to do it. Or if the soldier does something because the general in that troop, in that group told them to do something, is it really the soldier doing it, or do you go back to whoever happens to be the captain of that battalion or that group? Okay. Other example. Your hand writes. Is your hand writing on its own? Or do you go back to you are writing? You're using a tool, but you are the one writing. You cannot really give that causality or the effect. You cannot give the effect to your hand autonomously. And then the example that we gave multiple times, it helps us a lot, the mental image. So let's say I tell you to close your eyes and create a fire in your mind and bring a piece of paper in your mind beside that fire and have that fire start burning the piece of paper. So what's burning the paper right now? Your mind. It's not real burning, but what you've created in your mind, it's not the fire, it's your mind, and you're maintaining it in existence every second. And if you were to be distracted 1 second, that no longer exists. So when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has independent effectuality, this is what we're talking about. We can see that things are causes and they have effects, but they're intermediary, and even the ability to cause, the ability to have an effect has been given from the outside. And even that has not been given once and it just, life goes on. That has to be maintained every second. The fire does not burn on its own. So if we want to take it, let's say, to science, today science is the big thing. So if we want to take it back to science and say, for a plant to grow, here are the 100 conditions that have to be in place. And if those 100 conditions were in place, then the plant will grow, as though it is a necessary law. These are the universal laws. Okay, where do they come from? What is maintaining those laws? What is maintaining the effect of the cause? So what we're talking about is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being an independent effectuality. That's what we mean. Yeah.
And so, how does that differ from the Ash'ari view of Allah being the owner of all action?
So now you're adding free will. This is where you have to distinguish. So go back to our discussion about will, and when we said there's an existential will and there's a legislative will. So if we're talking about human beings now, there's a free will. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows you and gives you everything you need to exert that free will. That's it. So if I want to pick this up, it's my will to pick this up, and Allah will allow me, because I have no power of my own. Allah has given me power to do what I want to do. So I cannot go back and deny free will and tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're the one who did it. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who allowed me to do it. But He gave me the free will. This is the window I have.
And what would they say, that you don't have the free will to do it?
Of course. They say it goes against Tawheed.
That you don't have the will over your intention? They would say you have no will over your intention even? Or?
Yeah. You're a puppet, basically. You're being manipulated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So if someone wanted to murder somebody, they say Allah willed it?
Yes?
And they use that excuse, yeah. They used it.
Yeah, Yazdi used it, I think. Just to use it.
Yeah, and
So
now we're going to combine why politically that theory came into being. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they believe that they, whether through will and action,
Yeah.
or intent, sorry, that they have no free will whatsoever, even
No.
in intent.
Yes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do whatever He wants, and He can do whatever He wants with whatever you did too. You may do good and you still go to hell, and you may do bad and still go to heaven. And that's the shubha of all the anbiya going to hell. No problem with that.
That's also right?
Yes.
And then the Mu'tazila say that we have absolute free will.
Yeah, that's coming in 2 lessons. Yes.
So I want to get this straight. The Ash'ari, they're saying that whatever we do, Allah willed it.
Yes.
Right? So they're the literalists.
Yes.
And the Mu'tazila are the ones that are saying Allah created the universe, He left it behind, we can do whatever we want.
No, it's not left it behind, but we are responsible for our.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why usually sometimes it gets confusing, and a lot of our scholars have agreed with the Mu'tazila. So
Right.
just like in even the Sifat,
Yeah.
there's a whole discussion, But a lot of them have actually agreed, and they say الصفة عين الذات, المعتزلة. They say الصفة عين الذات. So some of them say that it's a replacement theory, النيابة. Okay, so الذات نيابة عن الصفات. But the others say الصفة عين الذات. They're not all the same. There's no consensus among the Mu'tazila on some of them. Because of course there's going to be influence between Shia and Sunnah and Mu'tazila, Asha'ira, back and forth. It's not clear cut. Some issues there's even less consensus. So that's one of them, as-sifata. But this one, yeah, it's well known.
Okay.
Yeah, it's coming soon. So what do we have here? Quranic examples of effects. So if we look at the Quran is always telling us to take time to ponder the nature and how it works. But the point is not nature. The point is not to tell us, look, rain, wow, rain is amazing. It's why does rain have the effect that it does? Where is it coming from? What are we, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the royal we, what are we doing with it? The effect of this cause is not from itself. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing in these verses, and there are so many of them. Rain, growing of plants, the work of angels, etc. So here, very quickly, a couple of examples. One of them. Say, who is the Lord of the heavens and the earth? Say, Allah. Say, have you then taken others beside Him for guardians who have no control over their own benefit or harm? Say, are the blind one and the seer equal? Or are the darkness and the light equal? Have they set up for Allah partners who have created like His creation, so that the creation seemed confusable to them? They're not able to distinguish which ones are the creatures of Allah and which ones are the creatures of these other gods. Say, Allah is the creator of all things. So the key here is this part. Keep this verse in mind. There's a lot of causes that seem to be the causes, that have effects. But if you go back to the ultimate tawheed of the Quran, say Allah is the creator of all things. That's one verse. Another one, have you considered what you sow? أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ مَا تَزْرَعُونَ? Are you the ones who make it grow, or are we the grower? That's another verse. Another one. So this one is a bit more, let's say, supernatural world. Say, the angel of death who is given charge of you shall cause you to die. يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ مَلَكُ الْمَوْتِ الَّذِي وُكِّلَ بِكُمْ. Every one of us has an angel of death who's been charged with coming and taking our soul when we die. Okay? So the angel of death is taking our soul. In another verse, the Quran says, Allah يَتَوَفَّى الْأَنفُسَ حِينَ مَوْتِهَا. So even when the Quran talks about the angels, He makes it clear so that there is no confusion. The act is Allah's act, and just like you would say the child is paying, but it's really the parents paying, or the soldier is doing, but it's really the captain of that troop, it is Allah who takes the soul at the time of death. This is so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying the angel is actually performing the act. But don't confuse that with the angel having any autonomy in their act, having any reliance on themselves, on some intrinsic power that they have, that they can just do something on their own. And then this is from a sermon of Imam Ali alayhi salam to his son. This is not a sermon actually, this is a letter. Imam Ali alayhi salam after the battle to Imam AlHasany alayhi salam. When he talks, this in here, we didn't talk about this, but there's another proof for the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this letter that sometimes is referred to in our books of theology. He says, O my son, if there had been a partner with your Lord, His messengers too should have come to you, and you would have seen signs of His authority and might, and would have known His deeds and qualities. But He is only one God, as He has described Himself. No one can dispute with Him in His authority. He has been from ever and will be forever, and so on and so forth. So that's another proof for the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The two important conclusions of understanding unity of divine action. The first one is theoretical, the second one is more practical. The theoretical one, or ideological one, is the link that we made in lesson 10 when we said if you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who has real causation in the world, linked back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the real creator. This was creatorship lordship, so the maintenance of the world, the taking care of the world, the managing of the affairs of the world, that falls under lordship. Creatorship is the ultimate causality. We said the conclusion of that is divinity, uluhiyya. Uluhiyya being worthy of worship. So now that we understood a little bit more the divine action being the only real action, we go back to the notion of divinity, of worthiness of worship. What is worthy of being worshipped if the only act is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's act? That's one. And of course here, and this is a reference to Tawheed al-Ibadi. Okay, so he didn't make it into a subheading, but usually in books of theology, this is the fourth one, Tawheed al-Ibadi. Tawheed al-Dhat, Tawheed al-Sifat, Tawheed al-Af'al, Tawheed al-Ibadah. So this is Tawheed al-Ibadah. The second point here, and of course Tawheed al-Ibadah is basically because people worship usually because they want something. So the author is saying if you want something and now you know that the only effect can come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the absolute causer, then why worship anyone else? That's one. On a practical level, and we could spend a lot of time talking about this very quickly, on a practical level, ethically, psychologically, so on and so forth. Someone who really understands this type of tawheed, someone who really understands that the ultimate absolute causation of everything in the world is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how can they ever be impacted by anything other than Allah? Even if, so if you want the natural, through natural means, anything, you're going to want to rely on Allah because you think He's the one who's managing the natural world, the natural order of the world. And you're going to go through Him. And if you want something that you cannot even fathom through the natural means, you can still go through Allah because you know that natural or non-natural is all in His hands. And this gives you, and that's why I'm saying this can become a very long, rich topic, but I think you guys understand the point. The peace of mind, the confidence that you can have, the more true faith you have in this kind of God. That He is the ultimate cause of anything and everything you go through. It's all in His hands. The safety net that you have under the superficial means that you see in the world, that everything you go through, you know that there's a safety net there. It's all in His hands. This makes you live your life differently. This makes you see the world completely differently. And then you understand verses in the Quran, for instance, the one that says, truly those who accept Ala inna awliya Allah, usually it's translated as the friends of Allah. I think it's better to say those who submit to the guardianship of Allah. That's al-wali. Those who submit to the guardianship of Allah, there is no fear, they have no fear, or there is no fear for them, nor do they grieve. Why? Because they understand how things work. They don't fear anything. It's all in God's hands. They fully submitted to that guardianship. They understand how things work. What is there to fear? My only fear is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's all in His hands. If my fear is only from Allah, that's why we have narrations that say, those who only fear me, I will make the world fear them. And those who do not fear me, I will make them fear everything. And I'll speak for myself, that's how we live our lives. We fear everything. When in reality, if we feared God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, nothing will fear them. In fact, I will make everything fear them. They will fear nothing except me, and as a reward, I will make everything else fear them. And of course, for us, if we really understood the meaning of this, we actually repeat this 10 times at least a day. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدْ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. So, إِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ in what sense? Well, it's supposed to be in the sense that we understand that you're the only one we're asking for help because you're the only one who can help. Because you're the only one who can cause and have effects. There's nothing else that can have effects. And so you are the only one who's worthy of worship. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدْ إِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. That's what we're saying, or we're supposed to be saying. The doubt, very quickly, the objection to all of this is this compatible with intercession or not? And we've already answered this, and we'll answer it very quickly again. If we mean by intercession that there is any entity that can do anything outside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power or permission or will, then that's shirk. End of story. And if we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, through that vertical causality that we explained, a permission for water to quench your thirst, or for fire to burn, or through a Tylenol to make your headache go away, then we may be able to understand what we mean when we say Allah may have given those powers to other creatures and entities too. So why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why would He have, alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah, why would He have created this type of world? Why would there be something like intercession? So the author gives two quick possible reasons. One of them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to highlight, wants to reveal to other creatures the status and rank of other creatures. That's a very good cause, very good reason. Another reason, to prevent those other creatures from ever having some sort of arrogance, thinking that they are now something because of their worship or their knowledge or their power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a reminder that there are creatures that are much closer to Him and much more knowledgeable and much more powerful than you are, and you actually have to go through them. And so this takes on an akhlaqi dimension. What I would add to this is that if you understand the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created this world, this is just the world it is, and everything goes through means. Everything, including human beings, including our worship, including everything. This is the type of world we live in. That's one. Secondly, there is no randomness in Allah's creation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't pick willy-nilly anyone, any creature, and tell you this is now a sacred thing and you go through that sacred thing. No. If He has put that sacredness in something, it's because that something is worthy. There's a reason, a realistic, substantial reason why you're going through there. There's something else to get. For instance, He wants you to get your knowledge through there. Okay? Let me finish this, then time is out. The last point was there's a human need to have sacred things in our lives. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us those sacred things. So those sacred means we don't need to create them artificially ourselves in our lives. Okay? So this meets the sacred need. I'll stop here very quickly, but the ones that we saw, the meanings of oneness that we saw in this lesson, he summarized them into 5. In this other book that I'm referring to, that's one example, Shaykh al-Subhani presents 10 meanings to Tawheed. So I'm mentioning some of them here. We're not going to go through them. The ones that we saw are on the left. The ones on the right, we may have seen some of them partially. So in creation, so monotheism in creation, that there's only one creator, lordship, but there's also governance, hakimiyya, obedience, al-ta'a, legislation, tashri'. Where does law come from? This is all falling under Tawheed. And this has ramifications in other areas, more practical areas in our lives. So this goes into economics and politics and law and other areas. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.